Welcome, everyone. You're listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading that change. Today's episode dives into a topic we care about but rarely get real with: mental health. Not in the corporate sanitized brochure-friendly way, but in a way that is raw, day-to-day, and how are we really doing out there kind of way. My guest is Pam Kern, MSLCSW, Director of Maritime Mental Health Services at Port Medical Management. Before that, she was a front of the house officer on cruise ships, living it, seeing it, breathing it. If you were a Karen on a cruise ship or a Kevin, you spoke to Pam. She's lived in officers and crew quarters, walked the decks, and now she's doing the hard work of helping others hold it together, especially those out at sea. Mental health at sea isn't a trending topic. It's survival, it's silence, it's culture, and it's time we had to talk about it for real. Pam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, this is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to having this chat, just because we have had a recent increase in awareness in seafarers and what they do. But, I don't think we're there. We're certainly probably further along than when I started a long time ago, and certainly from when you started. Talk a little bit about kind of what you did in the front of the house on cruise ships, I joked around about it, how you had to deal with all the Karens or whatever. Sorry if I offended any Karens, but I think we know the meme. And, what did that experience teach you about life on board? Because you were on board cruise ships for 20 years, and that's not insignificant.
No, definitely not. I wanted to travel the world, but I wanted to get paid for it. So I said, I'll just do 2 or 3 years. 18 years later, I have so many stories of situations that I have learned from people from being on the ship. I was the guest relations manager, which is AKA the complaint department. So I was one person sometimes for 2,000 guests. I had a team, though the largest ship was 16. But we at the front desk experienced anything from fires, floods, hurricanes, plane crashes, sadly people dying, even dying by suicide, sadly. And that's both guests and crew. The 3 things that I really learned from dealing with people, so 3 inherent things, is that people just want to be heard. Even if you can't get them what they want, whether it's an upgrade, compensation for their problem that was there or not there, they just want to be heard. And number 2 is culture and generations matter. And that would lead me into my number 3. They matter because really to meet people where they're at, not where we want them to be, but how to guide them when they do have problems. And on contained environment on a cruise ship, there's a lot that you deal with. Think about 2,000 people checking into a hotel all at the same time, using all the services at the same time. And 2,000 is actually small if you think about it. Cruise ships now, like Royal Caribbean, has got, I think, 5,000 is the most. So yeah, it's definitely a lot, but it was a great experience. It really taught me how human behavior in the workplace and where you live and where you work, where there's no boundaries, just fascinated me. So I think that's my long-winded excuse of why I stayed for 18 years.
That's pretty interesting. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how you went from taking the 3 things that you've kind of learned. How did you find that switch? And what was was there an aha moment when you decided to go, this is really good, but I want to shift my career into mental health care?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. There was an aha moment. I started to see my front desk team become more and more tired as their contracts went on. That's understandable. It fascinated me. And I wanted to stop that negative trajectory. So I started with very small interventions, like sending my team outside on deck to get daylight. I asked one of my team members, I'm like, when was the last time you actually went outside? She looked at me and was like, she had to really think about it. She's like, last cruise? I'm like, that was 10 days ago. So it's amazing how daylight can really help with mood. I then started with giving them days off when they arrive. So if you think about, you travel all around the globe to meet your ship, especially if they come from the Philippines, and then they're expected to work the day they get on board. And so I started experimenting with, no, you just settle in and then we'll see you the next day. And that started to segue to the big intervention, was actually giving days off from a 77-hour work week, working for 6, 8 months, even a year. When I had worked, the contracts were a year. So, that could be as much as 90 hours. So I found a lot of positive feedback, both in my ratings, both in my team. And so I asked the company at the time I was working with Holland America, I said, I really want to get a degree in this. Can I leave for a little bit and come back? And they were very supportive. And I did. I went to Columbia to get my master's in clinical social work within the workplace. So what that translates to, I am a psychotherapist. I can diagnose and treat any mental health condition. I'm licensed here in the U.S. And in the U.S., 70% of clinicians that do therapy are clinical social workers like myself, not so much psychologists like in other countries. So it varies from country to country. So these early intervention days really helped me to go forward with the work, both destigmatizing mental health as well as advocacy for days off. And actually, for some research that I did while I was with HAL on the days off, I'm going to be presenting it to be published at ISMH, International Symposium of Maritime Health. So it's something exciting to look forward to next month.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and congratulations on getting published. We look forward to that. Your focus is on cruise ships, and clearly the largest number of staff by far of any ships. And I think you bring up something very interesting, somebody who doesn't go outside. Whereas on cargo ships, generally, with the exception of maybe some engineers, but not even engineers, you would say that because sometimes you may have to walk to do bunkering or other things. So you may be outside. But the challenge with the cargo ships, obviously, and we're hearing a little bit about this, especially if automation starts to get a little bit more prevalent and the crew size, whereas you have a lot of people and you have to deal with a lot of different interactions. On cargo ships, you're dealing with 20, 22 people. Mm-hmm. You don't see everybody. If you're on let's say more of the day watch, you don't see the night watch and vice versa. You may not see, let's say, your counterpart in the engine room or deck. Have you looked at that? Have you, let's say, talked about the mental health side of that? And because that's a very different dynamic. Mm-hmm. Than there's some things that are same, somebody who joins a ship from the Philippines, still, maybe a second officer or the captain or whoever, but let's just say it's a junior officer or somebody like that who still has to travel pretty far to pick up a ship. We'll talk a little bit about some of those differences, and have you encountered that in your practice or what you're doing?
Yeah, great question. Let's talk sectors. So there are definitely some meaningful differences. Cruise ships, they generally get better access to services, right? They have more access and opportunity to resources on board. Even where the ship docks, they're usually in the heart of the city, versus cargo ships can be way, way, way out. So you don't have a lot of that easy access. Of course, there's exceptions, but for the most part, cruise ships try to get as close as possible to downtown areas. Then there's connectivity, which is a lifeline for crew, whether you're on a cruise ship or on a cargo ship. And cruise ships tend to have better infrastructure because they have paying guests. And that includes Starlink, which has been a game changer. I started in the days of Marinette, so like the telex. And Starlink is just incredible. It's like you're just at home from my experience. So that said, younger generations of seafarers, they see internet access as a basic utility, just like electricity. It's not so much a luxury. So charging for internet service, which they do on some cruise ships, some they don't, it can be a barrier to well-being. But regardless of the differences, there is also shared struggles with the two sectors, or, all of maritime sectors, whether you're in crew, cargo, ro-ro, what have you, is that you are still far away from family and friends. You still have social isolation. I mean, yeah, you can have lots of bars and lounges, but you have your phone and you're in your cabin and you would rather just be connected to that. So even though you have the access and opportunity, you might not use it. And let's not forget that all seafarers in all sectors work every day without a day off. That level of nonstop work takes a toll psychologically, emotionally, physically, no matter what kind of vessel you're on.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think that, certainly when I did it when I was younger, I would do 90 or 100 days. I mean, I was very lucky with US flag and spent a majority of that time as a ship's officer. So it was not necessarily difficult, but it does take a toll on you. I want to talk a little bit more about this connectivity because there is a dilemma, right? Because, on the one hand, you're connected with your family, you're connected with friends, spouses, partners, what have you. And if something goes wrong, if you're working ashore, it's okay, I can leave early. Or if you work from home, I can deal with it pretty quickly, at least confront it, figure out the scope. Even with good connectivity, there is a gap, right? There is
Yes.
You can't be there. Talk a little bit about that and what is the right way of doing things? Because I've had people on here, ship owners, and saying, well, we want to give them connectivity. Maybe it's not managed, but certainly we want to help them. But I've had other people say, no, it shouldn't be managed at all because are you managing the people who sit at your desk and make decisions, right? So it's this interesting dilemma. And I don't know, I think we're definitely in a space where there isn't a right answer. I think it probably goes along the lines of what is your cultural norms within a company? So what is your company norms and what are your company values? But I'm really curious to hear kind of how you see this going on, because Starlink and maybe there'll be others that really provide a great service of connectivity, but there is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I was just going to say that connectivity is absolutely a double-edged sword. So on one hand, or one edge of the sword, it allows seafarers to stay in touch with loved ones, which is just crucial. On the other hand, it also opens the floodgates to worry, especially when you receive bad news from home and feel powerless to help. So as you know, my husband is a ship captain, and the running joke in our family is everything breaks when he is away. Everything, big things, major leaks to loss of power, big storms, everything. And he feels helpless that he can't do anything while at sea. It's all about balance. And it's important for a crew, I think, to be informed but not overwhelmed. So being constantly connected doesn't automatically equal emotional support, but sometimes it can mean emotional overload, and that's what we want to avoid. So I try to encourage companies and families to have what I call communication plans before the even contract starts, before they go out to sea, that if there is a crisis, who's going to deliver the news and how? And to support the seafarer to reduce that amount of feeling helpless. A little bit of pre-planning really can go a long way. And instead of the crew member being blindsided, being helpless, that can't do very much, and then empowering them to be part of the process of what's happening without not feeling out of control. When you have a plan, you go to it, you feel more secure, you feel more empowered, in control. So connectivity is really powerful, but as long as it's paired with an emotional strategy to create certainty of a plan, and the brain loves certainty, something that's familiar, and to use that as kind of your crisis plan when the ship hits the fan, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because, certainly there's probably tons of examples of people, having this bad news and not being able to do anything about it. And then companies on their end worry about, well, this person, operates machinery, they operate on my, cargo, whether the cargo is passengers or the cargo is, 2 million barrels of oil. If you're on a VLCC, certainly each of those have their potential liabilities if somebody is not paying attention or not as focused, right? And I think that's the general balance there. I mean, are you seeing a lot of companies who look to employ these communication plans and use that as a suggestion to their, to their seafarers?
Shout out to Mission to Seafarers. They do that.
Okay.
They have videos where they educate seafarers to do that. I'm not sure if ISWAN does and other companies that I have not heard or seen, but Mission to Seafarers, I think, is actually one of the first that lets crew know, like, you can have a plan and this can work to your favor, just to give them tools in their toolbox to feel empowered. So they feel more in control, and that, the person at home who's dealing with the crisis can also feel more in control. So you can have that, dyad, that two parts of support versus just one feeling helpless. And then the other one goes, we can't do anything. How do we make this work? But a little bit of planning can go really a long way, because everyone has their communication preferences. Some, would rather just have through text versus voice. Some would rather be like, okay, this is your go-to person on land if you, need this to be taken care of. Let's say maybe if it's electrical or if you have a flood or something like that. But the more planning you can do, the more you feel in control.
I think you're absolutely right. And you go back to, I was talking to my son. We were talking about the stock market, and he said, well, this was when Trump was announcing all of his tariffs. He goes, Dad, what's going on? I said, well, the market does not like uncertainty. I said, so this is, it actually gets into our human brain, where the market is a reflection of some psychology in a way, right? So,
right.
as you've kind of gone through your journey in 20 years, plus years sailing and now doing this, talk a little bit about the attitudes, both for shoreside and for seafaring staff, around addressing mental health problems. Or not even mental health problems, addressing mental health, period. No problem. Just say the day-to-day grind and have you, especially for seafarers, but also for office staff, because I know that, there are times where it becomes a grind, where if you're an operator, you got 8-10 ships that you operate, one's always in port. There's always a problem, no matter how well it is. And talk a little bit about really, about the attitudes that you've seen evolve over the last couple of decades, because I think that's definitely something to discuss, and I would find interesting.
Yeah, it's twofold, both the company and the seafarer lens. I have seen definitely mental health has come more to the forefront, and that's good. It's less stigmatizing, because as you know, on a ship, you always have to appear strong. You can't appear weak. Being weak is vulnerable. And it's almost like everyone is faking it until they make it, if you will. I have seen a trend, not all companies, but some, where the assumption is that the lower cost when it comes to mental health equals, quote, good enough for mental health care. And since there's no regulation, like you're not required to have mental health, right? And well, the assumption is we're just ticking the box. Something's better than nothing.
Right.
And everybody will, look at like, okay, where do we go for that? And then I've seen a trend where they tend to go to the cheapest. I would like to propose, ask yourself, would you offer the CEO the cheapest mental health support? Probably not.
Right.
So why do we accept that standard for seafarers? These are the people that move 90% of world goods, and there's a disconnect in the value of seafarers on what they do. So usually when people will say things like, oh, what's this price? What's that price? And that's usually the first thing that will come out. Then I will ask, well, what do you want? What are the things you want? What are the outcomes you want? And then build price around that. Quality does equate to the value of what you get. But I would like to see that kind of script flipped, if you will, where the value of the seafarer is elevated to more than good enough.
Okay.
As you know, I work for Port Medical, and the company looks at a 360 degree of care. We treat sick and injured crew in all U.S. ports, both physical and, mental health, and they're connected. You shouldn't separate the two. The mind tells the body and the body tells the mind. It's all connected. Our thoughts create how we feel. Our feeling create our bodily responses. So if you've got anxiety, your body's going to start releasing cortisol and adrenaline, and treating them as one, and the seafarer as one, I think is really important. Second to that is stigma. Like I talked about earlier, unlike a broken arm, mental health struggles are really invisible until they, come to the surface. And sometimes that invisibility gets dismissed or minimized. And on board, we're faking it till we make it, want to appear strong. We don't want to appear weak. And, that has some consequences. So you've been on board ships, the leadership sets the tone. The captain sets the tone. It comes at the top and everybody knows when the good captain and the bad captain.
Oh, yeah. I was actually reflecting on that, dealing with some home life stuff with a certain situation. And one of my children are dealing with a toxic environment. They can't get out of it. There's a certain reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is just toxic. Right. And I look at, there is some, I don't want to get too deep into it, but certainly you could point to, you're like, why is this happening with certain things? And you go back to a toxic environment. And I know that happened with me. I remember I made like that wasn't even dumb error. There was nobody got hurt. Nobody, but like, Cap's like, well, why did you do this? Because I was scared of this guy. This guy had a reputation. As a matter of fact, this particular captain that I worked for, and it was seen by the office. What happened is, long story short, we ended up buying a new ship. All of the senior management went to go to see the new ship, and this captain complained for 2 hours about why the ship stinks. And then basically by the time the head office people got back, they said, you need to leave the ship. We're not going to fire you, but you ain't taking it out of the yard. Yeah. And there was a little bit of like he wasn't wrong. Like, don't get me, like he was probably right on a lot of things, but the stress that was caused by his
the ripple effect to everyone
was just because it made me freeze on doing a couple of, like, it wasn't bonehead, like we weren't going to get into an accident. It just, I misinterpreted something, but like, it was like, I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know why I did that. Why did I interpret it that way? Because I was, because you were so toxic. It's unbelievable. And I see some stuff going on now where it's like, this is unbelievably toxic.
Yeah. And it sets the tone for the mental health of everyone there. And it also then, even productivity. Goes as far as productivity, it can severely damage productivity, the well-being of crew members. At Port Medical, we've been working on a mobile, a web-based app called CCOM, where you're able to identify that negative trajectory with about 8 questions. And it's kind of like taking the temperature of the ship and the environment, and it's maritime specific questions from over 150 maritime research articles that what are the determinants of poor mental health? And a few of the questions do ask about the environment, the captain, the relationship. So we can stop that negative trajectory of poor mental health before it becomes a problem and get them back to their baseline and do that internally as well. So having the tool as well as the resources, therapists, because in the U.S., there's only 4 of us that are former seafarers and licensed therapists, and we all know each other. So that's
there you go. What are you looking at this at toxic work cultures? Looking at a view of some companies saying if it's good enough, then we're just going to check the box and hire folks. Is this part of the core challenge, or is there something else that's the core challenge that seafarers face when dealing with mental health these days?
Great question. I find maritime is deeply rooted in tradition, right? And air quotes, it's always been done this way.
Oh, yeah.
Why do we need to change it? That's the first thing. And then usually I do hear, well, when I sailed, we didn't have that. So, okay. So if you didn't have that, does it mean that your seafarers aren't deserving of that? Right. So when it comes to, mental health services and finding and identifying that both quantitative and qualitative, that it matters. Their well-being matters. It's directly tied to, dollar signs all the way down to, the bottom line, whether it's attrition and then, you've got to rehire somebody else, onboarding costs, mistakes of new crew members, because the time it takes for them to actually master it. I think the data shows like 3 to 5 years. it takes in order to somebody to become from a beginner to a veteran. Well, within that time, they make mistakes. Mistakes cost money. So you can put a dollar sign to it, but sometimes that comes so overwhelming that people of influence or decision makers will be like, oh my gosh, they'll freeze. Like, that's too overwhelming. We'll just stay with what we know because that's, human nature. So trying to convince the decision makers to take a chance and try something new, such as days off or investing in crew members with quality mental health care by people that are accredited, maybe have sailed before. So to bring their value up and align with that, that's where it starts. It really starts with the decision makers and the captains, and then it has to trickle down.
I think it parallels a lot to just, companies as well. I don't think it's necessarily unique to seafarers. I think it's unique in the sense of there's an extra layer of connectivity and that issue, as well as the inherent nature of the business. People do forget, not only are you working 7 days a week, you are working 7 days a week in a changing environment. Yes, we all deal with rain and snow and sleet, but to change as quickly and to affect your building doesn't move when it is windy out. Case dealing with all these different people for days and days on end can be taxing, to say the least. But I think that's just interesting. And one of the other things that I think, and I'm really positive about, is at least this view on mental health. And again, different degrees. And I think we could always probably, air quote it, do better. Even the best companies could probably always do better. But one of the things is looking at something that I've heard a lot about, and that is the shortage of seafarers. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to have this shortage. And I think that they're going to be looking at maybe not mental health per se, but health and wellness together, which obviously mental health is an aspect of that. Is this something that you're hearing these days?
Yes, absolutely. It's becoming more and more in the forefront. Some countries, mental health is still very stigmatizing, but it's getting better than where it was, because people want to always appear strong and like in control. And when you have mental health, it's like, so there's a cultural aspect to it too. I've had seafarers tell me that, no, I can't say anything because I'll bring shame to my family. It's their own internal,
right,
beliefs. We develop our beliefs by our life experiences, by what our caregivers or parents brought us up in, where we were brought up. So those all make the difference in how we perceive it and also how we address mental health. It is becoming more and more popular. I would love to see it become more mainstream and not so like, remember in COVID, it was like so mainstream,
right?
The circumstances. Was it a knee-jerk reaction? Yes, because of the situation. And I was very fearful that as we move further away from COVID, that the awareness would fade. And it has, to a degree, not as much, but it's not as, let's say, pronounced, because we don't have a pandemic anymore. But that's human nature. We kind of go back to our baseline. Like if you remember being in New York in 9/11, I was there. Do you remember New Yorkers being so nice to each other for about a year? They slowed down, they opened doors for each other because the city was attacked. And then over time that kind of faded and everyone went back to their baseline. But if we can keep the awareness going, that mental health is also part of your physical health and vice versa, I think it's really a win-win. There's so much research to show that if you invest in the person holistically, a company, you'll see your return on the bottom line. Will you see it in the first or second quarter? No, probably not. But you will see the return. But that's taking a chance. And we also then need to elevate the value of the seafarer, because that is also a stigmatizing problem.
Absolutely. One of the things, going back to New York, I think I heard this a while ago, New Yorkers and people from the East Coast are not nice, but kind.
Yes.
People from like other places are very nice, but not kind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it was the thing that was said. It was like New Yorkers won't say anything to you, but they'll like help you change your tire. People from other places will be like, "Oh, that's so bad," and they won't. "Oh, well, you're out of luck. Figure it out." So I think that kind of speaks to me. But I do know what you were talking about. I was living in Washington D.C. area at the time. Mm-hmm. The other interesting thing, and kind of the thematically part of this podcast, is talk about the digital transformation, right? And we talked about connectivity, which is a huge part of this. The pace of new tools, whether especially around energy efficiency, optimization of the route, of all these things, because the crew is going to be responsible for implementing these policies that companies have. And I think it's a good thing, whether it's what we have coming down the line, but what is here today, rather, with the IMO regulations, but going into the future on some more strict ones, new fuels, the use of AI, to maybe augment their work. Because most people I talk to say it's going to be the machine in the loop, not replacing humans, or the loop, whatever. But we're not replacing humans. I don't, especially on ships, I can't see it. What is your feedback, hearing, thoughts on kind of what's going on here with that specifically?
I believe in co-intelligence. If we evolve with technology, how can technology be our partner? Do I believe having AI or a bot replace a human for mental health? It is here and people are using it. I would say, to the extent you want to treat mental health conditions, no. I think it is a great adjunct in addition to, but not to replace the human when it comes to the mental health aspects. People are always looking for cheaper and better and faster, a computer versus, a human. Co-intelligence. Computer you can teach it to feel, but in life experiences, you can program it for that. But maritime, you need maritime specificity, targeted solutions. Yes, you can program a computer for that, but in that case, I would not replace the human in that space. But to an extent, to identify that there are problems, yes, absolutely. To treat the problems, no, I think you need human to human.
That's a great way to answer that question. But I was actually thinking about the impact of AI on the already building work that people are doing on ships, whether it's cruise ships or whatever. And how has that digitalization changed their role? And does it make their role harder? What do you like, and that sort of thing? Like, are you saying, you hearing some people you talk to, or even companies saying, my guys now have to learn, or my crew, my team have to learn so much more now. They have so much more to worry about.
Yes.
That part as well. And I wasn't even thinking about it, the way that you answered it. And I found that to be pretty interesting too.
Yeah, it's more platforms and lots of platforms that don't interface. So you have one program that might do this and another program that might do that. So you might have to learn different programs. And I know when I had sailed, and yes, that was a while ago when automation was being introduced, we had one program for the crew and guest manifest. We had another program for dining. We had another program for the key cards. We had another program for who was on the ship, who was off the ship. And there was like 7 different programs. They finally got one program to talk to most of them. You have to become more versatile now and tech savvy in order to survive, because things are becoming more automated, digitized, which I find interesting. We will do that for procedures, right? We'll take AI or technology for procedures, but when it still comes to circling back to days off, we've been able to figure out, rovers on Mars, gene editing, autonomous ships, but we can't figure out days off for seafarers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We could go on to that for a long time.
Yeah.
Saying that, looking back at your career, and we talked a little bit about at the beginning about, you wanted to travel, and now I've gotten into this really fascinating and I think timely part of what's happening here. What would you tell somebody who's looking to get into the industry? Maybe, rewind the clock a certain number of years for yourself, even more years, I believe, for me. What would you say about whether it's to be a mental health counselor, whether it's to be a seafarer like your husband, whether it's to be somebody just in the industry? What would you tell somebody who's thinking about that today?
Going to sea, ask themselves what their purpose is, and when is a good time to say, okay, have I filled that purpose? Knowing when to end, I think, is really important. I hear a lot from seafarers that I counsel, like, no, I need to go back. You can't say this to my company because I'm building a house, or
right.
Sending my kids to private school. So knowing when you have your threshold, and if the threshold is years, because you have years to pay for things, then have coping skills, tools in your toolbox to remind yourself why you're there, to kind of create the emotional buffer to help inoculate you when things become stressful. I would say that would be the thing. Know what you're there for. Remind yourself. give a timeline and say, I'm going to be here for X amount. These are the goals that I want to achieve. And the second thing would be open-minded. Be open-minded to every experience that is wild, crazy, can be scary, frightening. Be open to it, but also know that if it's too tragic, you are experiencing things that you know are not good, both physically or psychologically, to be okay with. It's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to ask for help. I've had many situations in my younger days where that I never thought I would have in a cruise ship. I was on a ship off the coast of Peggy's Cove, and we were the first on site for Swiss Air Flight 111 when it crashed.
Okay,
I was there for 2 days, like doing an outer box search, and the imprint of that was really profound. So every time I go on a plane, and when you walk on a plane, you smell that jet fuel.
Yep.
That space in between the bridgeway and the plane, and you just have that smell come up, and it will take me right back to that. So know that when things get really, really bad, that it's okay to reach out for help, whether you do it on board or, you do it at home, because the environment where you live is where you work. There are no boundaries. They're blurred. And that has a significant toll, on the self, both physically, psychologically, and emotionally.
I think as younger generations, certainly they're more open to mental health, and I think they're more aware of these things, which definitely helps as well. And as I wrap up, I love to ask, what are you reading these days? You mentioned you're writing. You're an author, which is interesting. We've had probably about 5 or 6 authors, a couple of technical books. Somebody who writes mystery novels, Chris Watson of
Very cool.
Chris Watson writes detective novels. I think he's up in the Northeast here as well. But what are you reading? Anything interesting these days? And it doesn't have to be like work related. Like I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Sigmund Freud or Jung books or anything like that. It could be like, I'm reading Star Wars, which is probably sitting on my desk actually.
I have so many books. My favorite author is Brianna Wiest. She's pretty incredible in the things that she writes about life experiences and way to look at things differently than I never would. My favorite is work-related. It's called The Body Keeps Score by a Dutch psychiatrist, Bessel van der Kolk. And he talks about how trauma's imprint does leave an imprint on the body as well as the mind. And it's super helpful for me, both psychologically, as a psychotherapist, but also just as a person, to look through a trauma-informed lens, whether it's through, with my kids, with patients, because everyone has had trauma, everyone. And I have, I'm sure you have, and most of it is invisible until something triggers it. If you remember from COVID, crew had no idea when they were going home, and that uncertainty was really frustrating. Yeah. It's a massive trigger, and humans crave certainty. And when that's stripped away, it can send people into this like survival mode or downward spiral. So when someone reacts in a way that's like out of proportion to the moment, they could be angry, shut down, or deeply anxious. So it's worth pausing and maybe asking yourself, wait, are they responding to something in the present? Or is it maybe something from the past that's coming up in the present? And that's the foundation of the book, all of like trauma's imprints and how to deal with on a very self-help basis, which I find really fascinating. So this isn't a paid promo, but it is a really great book.
It's okay. I've had people say that. I mean, I joke around. I say I'm Gen X, so we just kind of let everything roll past us and just please leave us alone. But that's kind of my generation. Maybe it's our flaw, or maybe it's our survival skill. I don't know. But anyway, this was super fascinating. Obviously, as seafarer, mental health is super important, but it's also important to put it in the context in which we are living today, which is a highly connected and highly digital world. So certainly something we can't forget, because we do push a lot of fancy tools and cool things that are going to save 2% efficiency on fares, but ultimately they have to execute. So it was great to chat with you, Pam. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your insights.
Thanks for giving space to what's often left unspoken. These conversations really matter.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.